All right, welcome to our live workshop all around settlement offers. And one of the reasons why we are doing this is that we have assembled a team together in the Divorce Allies that covers a lot of different topics in a live format and a question and answer format that is very similar to the format that we're kind of showcasing to you today. And part of what we provide is guidance and some assistance to women and couples who are going through the divorce process. And so today, my name is Melissa Gregg, and I am a business valuation expert and located in the Midwest. And I've been doing divorces and working with couples and business owners, primarily putting a price on a business when people are getting divorced for about 20 years, mostly in litigation, also trained in mediation, collaborative divorce, and a variety of other modalities. Kristen Terry is with us, and she is our parenting expert and very, very knowledgeable about the stages of child development, which are pretty important when we're trying to figure out how we're going to co-parent in the future, parallel parent, deal with maybe a toxic spouse through this process. So she's going to be giving us some ideas of what that looks like. And we have Emily Flowers here, who is our mortgage specialist. And really where she comes into play is if we're trying to figure out if we can keep this house and we need to refinance or make some other decisions. So what we thought would be kind of interesting or engaging, and the questions, if you have them, can be asked. We try to keep them confidential so that you can ask a question and we're not going to necessarily name out your entire name, but we will at least repeat the question and then try to answer it. So at any time during this workshop, you can certainly ask questions. If there are questions that we don't get to, then we will answer them in some other format. It could be a video on some of our platforms. We're also going to be offering these webinars or workshops on a monthly basis, just to give you some idea of what's happening every first Friday of the month. So you can also catch them on repeat or on the recording. So just to kind of start it off, I think in general, we're going to be talking about a settlement offer or how you try to get settled in a divorce. And typically that involves a financial piece, which is what I kind of cover. It involves a kid piece and a house piece. And so if we kind of walk through with you what a settlement offer would look like, or what some of the financial spreadsheets look like, or some things that you should consider if you're going to refinance your house or keep it, or consider as you're going through a parenting plan, it will help you kind of see that there's a holistic approach to this process. And so it's not just one or the other. We kind of work together to bring all of these pieces of the puzzle. We do have two members that are not with us, and they are enjoying their Friday. No, just kidding. We have Anna Graham, who kind of runs the back end and is very integral in understanding how to go about your side hustle or your new you as you go through this process. And we also have Victoria McCooey, who is our narcissistic coach and all things about strategy around kind of a toxic spouse. And so they are going to be available for the next workshops. But really, quite frankly, 3 allies in one room is pretty powerful in general. So Kristen, could you give us a little bit more information about your background, and why you're so passionate about this, and then maybe a little bit about what you do, and I'll get the spreadsheets ready, and Emily will give us a little intro as well.
Yeah, welcome everyone. We're so happy to have you with us today. I am Kristen Terry. As you can hear, I've got the funny accent. I'm from South Africa. And I was raised by a single mother, and much to my dismay, ended up becoming a single mother as well. So my perspective is always at that of the children going through divorce, but I also now have the perspective of what it is like being the parent with kids through divorce. that has helped shape a very personal approach from my side when I work with my clients. I have a great system, very targeted questions to get to how you can structure your parenting plan that focuses on the best interest of the kids. That is going to that is going to take into account their developmental age, your routines and structures that are currently in place, the relationships already existing with the children. And we'll go through that a little bit more in detail. But I'm extremely passionate about this because I do believe that divorce is not the end of the world for our children. And there's many beautiful aspects that children can gain when we support them through this process. Children that go through divorce and have been supported by their parents tend to be more resilient. They tend to be more empathetic. They tend to be more confident, more adaptable because they've seen the tough side of life, which we can never protect them from. But they have also seen, you know, they have seen you grow from that and get out of that. So that's a little bit about what I do, where I come from, and let's hand it over to Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily Flowers. I'm your divorce mortgage planning specialist, which most people don't know what that is. But basically, I specialize in planning out, are you going to keep this house? Do we need to take another avenue? Does it make sense for you? What are your options? How are you going to get there? Things like that. And we want to do it prior to some written settlement agreement for the specific purpose of, are you going to be able to execute? Because the language on the mortgage side is very specific and crucial. And so that is something that most people don't know. They think their divorce team's going to handle it, and not one of them knows what the mortgage guidelines are. So I am a licensed mortgage originator, but I also am a certified divorce lending professional and mediator. And so that gives me a length of knowledge that really does help you in this aspect. And I use a tool called the Divorce Mortgage Planning Report that specifically outlines all of the information and condenses it into these little options. And it gives you this little line that tells you, can ya or can't ya? And we make it very clear for you.
Well, and I think that part of this workshop is kind of showing you a little bit of an insight into the divorce allies, in that, when we have gone through this for several months, and we have a 90-minute circle that we talk about relevant topics each week. And each week some are about more emotional issues and some are around financial issues. And what we've noticed is that realistically, you have to deal with some of these financial issues. You have to figure out, can I stay in the house? Can I exit the house? Like, can I afford to be in another situation? What can I afford to be in? Like, what type of apartment? What are my options really in all of this space? But we focus on the fact that sometimes we are emotionally not able to make some decisions because it all seems too big. It all seems too much. And so part of today would just be to show you some of the spreadsheets or some of the things that we use, so that you can see that there's some tangibleness to this process of settling your case. I believe that, if we just start at that point, to really settle your case, you need to understand what you have. And so, the property is typically one thing that you consider, and debts. And so it's really putting together in business what we would call a balance sheet. And in divorce, we call a property statement or a disclosure of your financial position. And so the interesting part is that this disclosure is typically filed when you file for divorce. And so you're already having to go through and create it either with an attorney, with a mediator, on your own. A lot of people are just trying to figure it out on their own, and they don't even have a place to start. And so I'm going to kind of start to share my screen about a property statement, but you're going to very quickly see how this is the financial stuff. And as we start to get into the financial stuff, you'll quickly see how fast I need Emily and Kristen to help me with some of the pieces. And if you're traditionally just hiring somebody and hiring an attorney, but that's the normal process, you're actually going to pay them a retainer to do some of this beginning part. And it's very financial based. It's very child psychology based. It's based on refinancing, which is also then based on income and expenses. And you're talking to an attorney that understands the legal perspective and could give you some legal guidelines. You know, that legal things are alimony, maintenance, they call them different things, child support. These are all legal things, a separate asset like an inheritance or any asset that you believe you came into the marriage with or they believe they came into the marriage with. Those are the areas that have legal things, but they're also financial concepts. The attorney can tell you some of those legal concepts, right? Like, is it going to be separate or not? You know, what normally happens with the kids. But the reality is everybody has a very unique situation. And they're like, well, I have a special needs child. I mean, the moment you say that, oh, I have an arm on my loan or I have a HELOC, and everybody's like, wait, what are these terms? What are you talking about? And these become very important to understanding how you split the assets. Like if no one can keep the house, then we have a whole different option. If one person really needs the kids 75% of the time because they're doing, and another person even is a traveling spouse, there's ways to talk about all of these things, but you're putting them down on paper with an attorney at the very beginning when you really don't know all of the stuff. And so planning ahead, or what we like to even just say, like getting prepared. If this is a multi-phase process, the beginning part is document collection. It's writing down what you want. Like you're not necessarily like you're collecting documents for Emily's stuff and my stuff, but for Kristen, you're trying to figure out what you want. Like how and really, if you guys back up a bit, you have to figure out what's best for the family. And that's where we're getting a lot of this loss, because you'll go hire an attorney and they'll go hire an attorney. And you're like, how do I get the most out of this? That's probably not where to start. Where to start and where we start, and I'll kind of start to show you, is we start in the middle and say, what would be a great solution for the whole family? And then where could I maybe get a little bit more of what I want and give up some stuff that I don't, or vice versa. And so that, though, then has a conversation with like Kristen, like, okay, where the kids need to be in school. What about moving back and forth, like of age terms? But as I pull up the screen, in the first phase of this, of document collection or thinking about it, what should they start to pull together or think about in this process to even get to that settlement?
And I think, oh, sorry. We have a little comment here that's like, my attorney doesn't seem to understand my case's financial issues. Who else should I hire? And we're going to kind of walk through that today and discuss, who you would need on your divorce team.
And that's exactly the point of why the divorce allies are there. And I know Melissa did say this earlier, but it's like hiring a doctor to get your teeth done. The attorneys are there for the legal expertise, and you pay them from the start, and that financially can cost you a lot more. Whereas if you get the experts in each area, someone that knows the kids, someone that knows the house, someone that knows the finances, get a perfect picture, then you take it to your attorney to overlook and have a look at the legal aspects. But at the moment, the system is asking the attorneys, what is their perspective on the finances and the house and the kids? And they're not necessarily, I stand corrected, but they're not necessarily the experts and the ones that are going to give you the best advice, or lay out all your options for you.
Yeah, let us help you get that organized so that you know what to give to the attorney, maybe.
Well, and I think that this is the problem is in this divorce process, it is a process. And if you're going legally, which means you've hired an attorney, then, and this is not legal advice, and we're not giving you any legal advice, but when you hire an attorney, they're going to go about the legal process as they see fit. And so they are used to doing divorces. So they're going to put you in the pipeline of doing a traditional divorce. And when you have these situations that are not traditional, they're not necessarily going to be like, oh my gosh, let's come up with a creative idea of how to do this. They're going to be like, okay, here's the 3 ways that we normally do it. And I don't really know about your special needs child, but I'm sure somebody can figure that out, but, and not realizing that it impacts the child custody. It impacts the pain. Like sometimes these children are never going to be independent. And so we actually have to create an entire process for them into adulthood, and they're 2, so it's really aligning the right experts, but also your attorney's not necessarily going to be responsive. Your expert, sometimes you have to hire financial experts. They're not going to necessarily be responsive to you because we have to abide by the rules of the court. And when I'm hired, even though you think you hired me, and I serve as a financial expert in a lot of cases, I am there to give the judge the reality of the financial situation. I'm not there to give you and your spouse whatever you want to hear. So, and a lot of experts could be hired to just give you what you want to hear. And so in this capacity, if you step back, the one person that really knows what you want out of this conceptually is yourself. And so what we dial back in the Divorce Allies is really saying, okay, you say you want the house, but do you really want the house? Like, do you, and this is like like I'm pulling up a property statement right here and we can kind of see it, it's pretty easy to understand. But this, when we start with the primary asset, and normally this is all empty. So I'm starting with one that's kind of already filled out so you can see what it looks like. But when we're starting with this, we're going to start with the house and we're going to be like, okay, let's assume you guys are the spouses. Would either one of you like to stay in the house? Like if I'm the mediator and you guys come to me, I'm going to be like, great, you guys have this house. It looks like it's all paid off. So that means that if somebody keeps it, we're going to have to figure out how we get the other side of that equity to the other person, right? And so probably the lawyer's going to say, oh, just go get a mortgage on it, go get a cash out on that mortgage. Well, we don't have a mortgage in this situation. So they're going to try to give you some options either based on their own personal experience of buying houses. But when you step back, the things that they're not asking is, why do you want to keep the house? Do you want the safety of the house? Well, no, I don't really feel safe in the house. A lot of bad things have happened in the house. Okay. Well, my kids know that house and it's, I like the neighborhood. Or I like the neighbors. I don't want people to think that my life has changed. I don't want people to think that I lost the house and he got the house. I don't want them to think we went from this huge house to an apartment and now my kids aren't going to want to stay with me. These are the things that your attorney or your expert aren't going to talk to you about. And quite frankly, they become really big pieces of the puzzle in not only your settlement, because you have to figure, for the most part, if this makes anybody feel better, most people are in heavy debt right now and they don't have a lot of assets. And so we're really trying to just figure out how everybody can come out a little bit okay. So this house, even if it was a great investment purchase, everything 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, in a settlement offer, you really have to start to look at this as like, is this the best financial decision? Because your attorney is going to tell you a lot of reasons to do a lot of things with your financial assets that may make sense legally, and you're taking a gamble, or they're the best idea for you and your family. So, and we've had a lot of conversations, and I'll let Emily and Kristen kind of talk about, like right now I would say, hey guys, have you figured out who's going to stay in the house? Have you talked about what that looks like? Because even if you sell it, there needs to be a plan. And what would be the questions that, Emily, first of mind, I would say, hey, I think we got to get $225,000 out of this house. Can I just get a equity line? Could you just give me, like if I have a house paid off, it should be pretty easy to get a loan, right?
Sure. I mean, most of the time, but at the same time, I don't know what your credit situation looks like. I don't know. I mean, if you have your mortgage paid off, and if you're one of those people that maybe just doesn't do debt, you don't have a credit score. So let's address the big elephant in the room, right? So could it be that easy? Could we just go get a home equity line of credit and pay that person out? Yeah. What does that look like financially for you? I don't know. Is it reasonable at 9% or 10%? Maybe. Is a new mortgage like a cash out? Possibly.
Okay,
But
so
then again, does that fit in with your comfortability?
What are the two things that we would ask ourselves in this situation if I'm trying to figure out whether to keep the house or if I can stay in the house? Like, how do I need to figure that out?
For the mortgage side, I would definitely figure out my credit situation, and I would work on my income and expenses. Like, what does my monthly in and out look like? Because for a mortgage, and I tell people this all the time because nobody knows what a 45% debt to income ratio is, right? It just means that you have 55% of your income to work with. And you're going to use up 45 in housing. And can you afford to get your hair done and the kids fed and the, whatever with that 55%?
Okay. And so those are the money issues, but like I also have to figure out, Kristen, like if I mean, for the most part, if we put all our money into paying off this house so that we could have this house, right? Maybe we don't have a lot of retirement, maybe we do. And I got these kids, and I'm going to make up what the kids' ages are, unless somebody in the audience wants to tell me what ages they would like the kids, like if they're in a situation similar, tell us your ages and we can kind of give you some basis. But let's assume, you got one in more like a middle school, high school, and you have one in grade school. So one cares and one doesn't, right? And you have a house, what are the concerns, Kristen, or what are the questions that you're asking to understand, what the possibilities are or the things that you're thinking are going to be important to pay attention to?
Firstly, is if, of course, I work with Emily to understand if they can or can't keep the house financially. That is important. But there's the emotional aspect and the stability aspect when it comes to kids. So stability wise, are they going to be able to stay in the same school? Can you afford another place in the same school district? Or are you going to have to move schools? So that for children, especially a child in middle grade and high school, their friendships are established. Their sports teams are established. So you've really got to look at how that's going to rock the boat for their stability. For a younger child, they do adapt a little bit more and they may not have those longer term friendships, but it is going to rock the boat. And then there is the emotional aspect for everyone involved. Now, say mom stays in the room. Now dad's not there in the house, or say mom stays in the house, sorry. Now dad's not there. His space at the dining table isn't there anymore. There's memories for everyone in this house, and it makes it harder for people to move on. And a lot of people want to stay in the house because everyone's stable and everyone likes the house, and this is where where you saw your children growing up until they move out the house, but new is good. And a lot of people don't think about that new perspective of what could it look like if we moved out. And it's a fresh start for fresh traditions and fresh spaces, and not looking around the same house with these memories and that missing person. So sometimes the emotional aspect can be very difficult. And that's the reason that people either choose to stay or not, because maybe they can afford to move or sell, or stay in the house, but it might not be emotionally the best thing for the kids or for yourself, because your kids deserve a happy mom and a happy dad.
And I will say, for the most part, this is what you would spend a lot of time with either at the beginning stages with an attorney. Like typically a mediator isn't going to do this. In collaborative divorce, they would do the same process where you really have to go through all these machinations of like, okay, are the kids going to be better in this house? Is it going to be better to keep this house or have two different like there's so much that goes into trying to figure out what the possible solutions could be, that you don't really have that knowledge at the very beginning of when you're filing. Like it almost, so if you look at it from that perspective, it could take you a couple months just to collect some of the documents, to start to look at some of the expenses, to start to look at apartments in your area to see if they have 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms that could be sufficient, and not breaking the bank. Like it really does take talking about these things from all of these different people in order to understand what is financially reasonable. So at the very beginning, it's really, what do you have access to? What data, what statements, what bank statements, what tax returns, what financial statements you can get. A lot of times, if you do have retirement assets or a financial advisor that you're working with, they're going to meet with, you or your spouse every year and come up with a plan. They probably have an analysis of all the things that you own in a very concise report, pulling your credit report. I know, Emily, you've said, pulling your credit report and your
number one thing.
huge. And I mean,
Huge.
it identifies accounts that you might not even know your name was put on, right?
Absolutely. 1000% best thing you could ever do for yourself.
And
And it's free.
eventually it's free. And the other thing, it's not just checking your credit score, it's checking your actual credit report. And so understanding what is tagged to you from a financial perspective, and because you're going to want to close those down. But when we're talking about the property statement, if we just, in my mind, this spreadsheet right here is the starting of a settlement offer. And so the more you know what you can put in this spreadsheet, the better. So if you're like, oh, I don't, retirement assets, yeah, I know we have some, but I don't have access to that statement. Well, right now you might be able to say, okay, we have retirement assets. Maybe you can say what place we have them in there. And you could say, okay, I have some assets at Thrivent. Okay. So I look at this number, but I don't have a recent statement. So sometimes you're going back and saying, well, I had a recent statement in 2021. Okay. And I saw, at that time they had $455,000, and I don't know what it was. And these statements actually have a little bit more stuff to put in, but you would also kind of notice the date. So we're going to say, okay, as of 11/1, 2024, this, 2021, you're right. So we have the statement as of 2021. So we put this number in here, and we basically are saying, we don't know what the amount is right now, but we know that that account existed. And this is important a little bit, because mostly you guys will know that an account existed, but it could be gone. It could be it disappeared. You haven't had access to it. They've moved it to another account. But you've identified at least one piece of paper that in 2021 had $455,000 at this institution. So one thing that you can now do is subpoena that institution if you go into litigation. Or what we are seeing is a lot more people are trying to have these discussions with their spouse, or the attorneys are talking back and forth, or the attorneys are coming together with a mediator in the middle, and you're having these discussions. But your purpose for this is to say, it existed. I know that there was money. In this case, when it's a retirement asset, we're always going to look at the most recent information, unless you're getting divorced in a state that specifies that the date of separation or some other date is the date of valuation. Okay. Missouri gets you closer to the trial date, is the date that you need to value it. Somewhere like, I can't remember. It could be, I can't remember the state, but certain states will set it in motion that it is the date of separation. So like Kansas, I believe, is the date of separation. So everything, it never changes. So you can do everything as of that date, whatever it was, right? But in this situation, if you put this over in an offer, we would always want it to get to that date of separation or the date of trial, so closer date, so they would have to update it. But if it's missing, you want to tell them, you need to show me where it went. Like, I want the documentation that says it was 455 here, and then we did one of two things, spent it. What did we spend it on? Or two, it got moved to another location, because it could be more. It should be more, right? We should see an account. So now if you see another account somewhere and it's the only other retirement asset account, and that account has 600,000 in it, but it's at another location, it's probably that same account, right? And so what you want to be mindful of is that they might prove out that money went from, Thrivent over to this other company, right? So that would be how you would be proving it out or putting it out on an offer if you don't know the information. Like, if you don't know your checking account information, but you know that you're going to split that cash, it doesn't matter if your checking is $20 and I want you to put your eyes right on these numbers, okay? These numbers are not going to they're going to be the same each time. So it doesn't matter if you have $20,000 of an asset or $10,000 of an asset. If you're splitting it, the value doesn't matter. Okay. And that's an important piece of this settlement conversation. If you're right, if the house is a whole different conversation. Typically, you're not going to keep the house in the middle. So you can't put that the house is in the middle, because I got to get you $275,000. What they're typically doing is saying you get $550,000 of the house. It has to stay on your column, and I'll get $550,000 of other stuff, right? I'm going to get more of the retirement assets. Now, again, a house is an asset that costs a lot of money and doesn't give you any income, typically, unless you're renting it out to somebody, which, again, are you going to live in it or rent it out? You still would have to find a place to live. The retirement assets, depending upon if they're pre-tax or post-tax, might not be an equal value. So until we put all of the things on the spreadsheet and either make up some numbers or have a reference point, and that's where this beginning phase of document collection, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to find the most recent documents. You just have to start to cobble it together to put it on this format and figure it out. And the only time that you would keep a house in the middle is if you did like nesting or something like that. And it's a very unique concept. I don't know, Kristen, if you want to explain what nesting is, because I don't see a lot of people do it, but it is definitely an option when you have a big house and even a secondary property that could be like a rental or an apartment or condo or something like that.
Yeah, so the only time we're going to look at nesting, and nesting is also not a long-term plan. It's a temporary situation, because you do want to officially separate. But the only time you're going to be looking at nesting is when you have children under the age of 2 years old. So when the kids are still really little, for instance, you're getting divorced with a 5-month-old baby and you're still breastfeeding, or a 1-year old, then instead of you making the kids travel between two separate properties, what happens is the children will stay put in the house. So the baby will stay put in the same familiar house, because at this point in their development, primary caregiver and stability is of utmost importance for their emotional stability, their emotional regulation, their attachment styles going forward. So the parents would then say, for 2 nights, mom is with baby at the house, then and dad stays at the condo. It does work well when when there are two properties, and then you swap out. The parents swap in and out instead of the children being disrupted and a new bed every second night or every third night.
Yeah, and Emily, have you seen, like in some of these situations where you even if you had some, like, even if we put some debt on this house, right? Let's say we have $300,000 worth of debt, which would be more realistic to somebody out there that, there's some equity in their house. Can I just assume that I can get an equity out, like cash out of my house? Because I can tell you, I'm not seeing it in a lot of the cases that we're doing that are going to litigation. We're seeing it's really difficult because they might have some retirement and they might have a house, but there's not a lot of cash to trade, and so, and it's really hard to make everything even, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm seeing it where most people are having to take out some debt, usually affixed to a mortgage somehow, either a refinance where it's called an equity buyout for the spouse, which just adds to your mortgage. Rarely do we cash out in that situation, although it seems like a cash out, or a home equity line of credit or something like that. It's rare that somebody just has assets that are, in my world, that are available to them to equalize in another way. But a lot of people, you have to understand that your house Melissa's right, it's a dormant asset. It does not make money for you until you sell it or you cash out of it. there's nothing, it's a forced savings for you.
Well, and
So
even in this situation, if you did, like, let's ignore this little inheritance or whatever, but if you did keep this house, and somebody has equity in this house, and they say, okay, I'll allow my spouse to stay in the house. Maybe they're better capable of paying for the house. And a lot of times there is one spouse that really wants to keep it, but it's still for emotional reasons. It's to keep the other person to not have it. So you have leverage in negotiations when you can actually give an asset as well. So if you know that you could give up on the house and you're willing and even are planning on other ways of going about, your housing, you have more leverage and control over that negotiations. And so it's not about the person that you perceive your spouse having the power. It's really about, in this situation, if one person kept the house, the other person is going to end up getting a little bit more of the retirement assets. Okay. And in this case, when they have a Roth IRA, which is an after-tax asset, we would want all of that, because, and we can talk about some of this, but when we're looking at this, what happens though is that now if one spouse keeps the house and the debt, the other spouse is going to get a little bit more over here, but it's all in retirement assets. It's not in something that you can put a down payment on a condo or go figure out some other option. And so in this situation, they're now potentially looking at, am I going to be paid maintenance? And you guys have to know that some states call it maintenance, some states call it alimony. So sorry, I'm in a state that calls it maintenance a lot. So alimony and child support are typically calculated, and it's a legal calculation, interestingly enough. And they're calculated based on each state's requirements, so the age of the kids, how many nights are going to be with each parent. And a lot of times people are fighting over the nights with each parent because it has an implication to the child support. If they get the kids 50-50, then in their minds, they're going to pay less child support. So we have to kind of get away from that conversation. It's more, and if you're looking rationally at the marital house, then what you're looking at in this situation is you have to get some money out of that house for me in cash, or an asset has to be liquidated, like the retirements would have to be liquidated because, and the tax would need to be paid on it because I need that money after tax. And if you think that those are inevitable things, sometimes we encourage those things to happen before the divorce is final so that people can figure it out. But in the case of alimony and child support, Emily, if I'm trying to figure out what I need for down payment, and maybe I have, a part-time job that I work during when the kids are at school, because I'm the primary kind of pick them up, take them everywhere. What do I need to figure out and how I can afford, because it's kind of tied to alimony. Can I afford to go into another apartment? How do I figure out what I'm going to receive in alimony? And then how does that number tie into what you're doing?
Yeah. So, income is a very important number for your qualifying purposes for a mortgage, right? And alimony and child support do count as income after they've met certain requirements, which is very technical, and we can go into it another time. But we would kind of need to back into it, right? So let's say you've had that part-time job for 2 years, because you would have had to have the job for 2 years in order to use that as qualifying income. And then you have a little bit of child support and a little bit of alimony, and we can add that together to make a calculation to see what you can afford to live in. And also, Melissa, I think the one thing that we're not addressing is, just because you make a decision, right now, doesn't mean that you have to stick with that decision. Unless it's the house, you may have to stick with it a little bit longer. But like, if you live in an apartment, okay, so you're there for a year, you can make another decision. Like, it's okay. But when you're looking at these numbers and they're giving you, $1,000 in alimony and $1,000 in child support, and you make $1,000, you have $3,000 to work with. And 45%, almost 50% of that is going to be used for your housing. Can you live off the other half?
And
Does that
I
make
think
sense?
that, yeah, and an important thing to consider too is that, and somebody mentioned it, like I can't wait to get out of the marital house. I'm nervous to bring it up with the kids. They're friends with all the neighbors. Like, these are uncomfortable conversations that you're having that, quite frankly, maybe you just never had a truthful conversation with yourself or anybody of like, hey, we can't afford this, or hey, let's live in a different within our means. And for you starting out into a new life, that might be a consideration. The other thing that we really recommend is that you don't do big moves for a year. So it may be getting over the fact that you might have to move twice, like think of it as clearing out everything. But,
Yeah.
Kristen, from even a child's standpoint, you know, I think women get very concerned that they can't provide the same lifestyle that the kids were experiencing when they were together, so they're not going to get the pool, or they're not going to get the fancy things that dad could provide or something like that. But the reality is, we know that that's not true, that what children need from women and mothers is a lot more than all of that. And if you go into this stressed about the house, it's not going to get you into a good. So talk to us a little bit about, like, you're not going to ruin your kids' lives with making these good decisions.
Yeah, it is with kids. It's always the conversation, and maybe you've not had these difficult conversations with your kids, but open communication is the best thing. And your children just want to see you happy. Maybe you've come from a toxic environment, or even if it wasn't toxic and out there in the kids' faces, kids can feel the energy that when mom and dad are not on the same page, they feel that energy. And there's so many ways that you can approach these moves. I worked with a client, I myself did this, where we moved to a different place. And upon arrival, we had these huge teddies on the kids' beds with little notes saying, "Oh my gosh, I've been so excited for children to move into this house. We haven't had children in this house." But there's ways that you can make it exciting for your kids, and even make it exciting for yourself when you're moving. Maybe you had a huge house with a huge yard that you don't want to have to maintain that yard. Now you find a place that's got a beautiful little courtyard with a lemon tree, and there's different, and you don't have to maintain all these things. But these are always conversations to have with your kids, and being open with your kids. I think a lot of parents try and shelter their kids, which we should be doing depending on their age. I mean, that's how I work with my clients. But, you know, teenage children, you can have an open conversation and say, yeah, you know what? It's going to be an adjustment. It's going to be a new space. But look at all the positives. So children generally are thinking about, how is this going to affect me? And if you can put a positive spin on that and take a positive approach for them, they're going to be okay. Life is going to throw so many crazy things at your kids that you cannot protect them from. Divorce is not one of them. Divorce is not one of those things that you're not going to be able to support your children through. You can support your children through this, through open communication, through vulnerable communication as well. Showing your kids that, you know what, I also feel sad that I have to leave the house, but I'm excited about this and I'm excited about that. Be real. Be real. You're human, and showing your kids that you are human is you've got to model it for them. So that's kind of where my approach is, modeling it and being open and honest with your kids.
And I think it takes both. You have to be reasonable with and realistic with your finances in order to be open about the communication and the willingness to move into territory unknown.
Yeah, you
Well,
have to know the finances so that you can then understand what is realistically
it's almost
your
like
options,
freedom.
so that you can communicate that with once you have that knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm.
And from that moment, you can start troubleshooting and saying, okay, how can I approach this? And think outside of the box of how you can approach this.
Well, and when you're looking at all of these things, to be able to step back and say, you know what do I really want? Because a lot of things that we're talking about in the circle is identifying what you really want, letting go of the things that you don't want. In negotiations, leverage is around the things that you can walk away from and disconnect from. And so if you know that that house is one of the biggest pieces in this negotiation, the moment you let it go, you also take away the power it has over the other individual on you. But you also have to realize that, like, assets are not split down the middle. And so this is just a really simple showing you that if one person keeps the house and they each keep their car and they split the bank account, you're really left with these retirement assets or these assets. And even when I split them 50-50 and I get the other Roth IRA, which, and somebody asked a question about it, but I'll talk about it in a second. We still don't have enough to get it onto one side. And this is where, if you don't put this calculation in play, you can't see that this is the total. So if we have all these assets of 830,000, in order to split it, we want to get each person has like 425. And so I talk about these hypothetical buckets. And just like buckets, you just want them to start to kind of weigh evenly. And most states will have language that says equitable. Some states, like that are community property, are making assumptions that everything is 50-50 if it was acquired during the marriage. So again, if you think something is separate, you're going to have to prove it. If they think something is separate, they have to prove it as well. So assuming that everything is marital, we don't have a way for one person to take that house as it is and give the other person other things. And so in this situation, the more that you can say, you know what, I can walk away from the house, or do we need to sell the house? Right? Because then we can start to split things and nobody has to go get additional debt. But if somebody really wants to double down on the house, and I will tell you, for the most part, you are probably in situations where everyone is telling you you cannot afford the house. If you have stayed at home with the kids and you have and even if you have supported your spouse throughout this entire process of education and building a business, everything is still splittable. Now, the business, which we don't have in here, is one of the pieces that is an unknown. The value of the house is a little bit of an unknown. And so those are the pieces that they're going to kind of use against you to manipulate the system. The reason why I get involved as an expert is because the business valuation is a number that is very subjective, that two experts could come up with two different numbers. The same with the house. Two real estate appraisers could come up with two different values for the house. So again, a lot of times each side is hiring those people. The reality is, can you come and figure this out? I mean, in some ways, one way to fix this is that I'm going to keep more of the retirement. Now, do I have to get it to the point where I keep all of it? No. So I might be able to keep 80%. I might be able to keep 70%. So you try to get this down to where this becomes zero. And everybody is now just keeping this portion. So that's pretty even, that now one person gets the house and the other person is going to get out of the retirement, they're going to get 400 and the other person is only going to get 150. So again, you could see how we played around with this one account to try to get it so that it evened out. This is essentially what everybody's doing, just in a very convoluted way out there. So they're not putting it in a spreadsheet, but they're kind of going through like, yeah, okay, I think I would keep the house and it's worth 550, So what we do is we use this as the basis of the settlement offer, and we put in the bottom, if you think the house is worth, 600,000, then, and again, now you got to go into the psychology. They're going to keep the house, and the house now they're going to want it to be worth less, right? Because they got to keep it and they don't want to give you a whole bunch. So they're going to come and say, no, I think the house is worth 450. So we're going to say, if you think the house is worth 450 to 550, right? Or below 550, either way, you can say, we will hire a joint or, the same appraiser. And we will agree to an appraiser and we will get that house valued and we will determine it. You don't typically need to value something if you're going to sell it. So if you're going to sell it, again, go back to that, what I said, if you're going to sell it, you do not care what the value is, because you're going to sell it, pay the taxes, do whatever it needs to do to get it to sale, pay the realtor, do all of that thing. And then at the end of the day, there's going to be a chunk of money, and we're just going to divide it. So in those cases, it's very easy if you go to sell it. If you keep it, that's where you're going to start to see manipulation in, well, you keep, then they might push the house to you and they'll keep the business. And that's a little complexity that we'll cover at the next workshop in a month, at the next First Friday. But part of this was to give you an idea of what we talk about in the circle. And so in the Divorce Allies Circle, we are typically coming together each week for 90 minutes. And the 5 of us, we have a mortgage specialist, we have a child specialist. So we're looking at parenting plans. We're looking at whether we can refi or keep that house and what we can afford. We have a narcissist coach that's going to talk to you about how to negotiate and how to, really how to balance yourself so that you're not triggered in these situations. And so we work a lot on building you up, building your self-esteem, journaling what you really want, leaning into your intuition. If you think that something is wrong or off, a lot of times people are coming to us because they're like, something doesn't make sense here. Like there's money missing, they find a statement and they're like, oh, what happened there? So in all of these situations, women are coming together every week to ask their questions to the 5 of us. Anagram is also our marketing kind of specialist. So she helps everybody make sure that they can download everybody has a book that you can download. Everybody has guides that you can download. Everybody has training and videos that you can look at immediately. Like if you sign up at midnight, you have access to be able to start to watch and go through these things. You're going to have the settlement spreadsheet. The settlement spreadsheet is one spreadsheet in a series of a million things that we go through to kind of help you through your situation. We know that your situation is very unique. The thing is, you have to take control of that situation and the narrative around this settlement discussion, because quite frankly, you know how it would be best to split everything in a reasonable fashion. So if you can treat that property statement, or again, you can write this down. You can pull up Excel. You can start to put this together in a rational format that you can then give to your spouse. You could give to your attorney. You could go to a mediator. You could go to collaborative. You could send him it in an email. You could leave it out by the coffee pot. There's a variety of ways that you can start to have an uncomfortable conversation about splitting. It just means that you need to take some steps. And we believe at the Divorce Allies that you can actually do this whole process on your own. And it's a big thing that maybe not everybody is even convinced that they can do themselves, but we give you the tools, we walk you through, we allow you to ask questions in live fashion every month. And quite frankly, you can join for a month and leave. And if you come in and do everything that you need to do, our goal is to get all the information to you in the cheapest way possible. But we have 20 plus 30 plus years of experience, sometimes 5 years, sometimes 10 years. So when we need somebody who has another 20 or 30, we bring them in. We have specialists coming in on trauma, on generational trauma, on relationships, on love bombing, on dating, on health and fitness, even some of our experts here do some things on meditation and fitness, these are all of the pieces you need to not only get through the divorce, but to actually go into the next version of this life, a completely different scenario. So if you can look at your financials in a way that is holistically what's best for not only your mental health, your children's mental health, and the well-being of the family, I think you're going to get to a situation where they're going to come to the table and start to have a discussion. So the more you can even go back and forth in that negotiation, you're saving yourself time, effort, and money by not having the attorneys do it, not going to court and do these things. But certainly that's my suggestion, my leaving tip for the financial. And I'd love if they provided a leaving tip, and then we'll close it up and see you guys next month.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
my leaving tip is by doing this yourself, you keep the control. The moment you go through the system, you're handing over control to everyone else. So getting clear on what you want, whether it be the house, whether it be the kids, and keeping the kids, my biggest tip, keep the kids at the center of your focus. With every decision you make, ask yourself, am I making this decision because of my own emotions or because this is what's best for my kids? So consistently redirect yourself to focus on the kids.
And I'm going to just tell you, every time you get flustered in wanting something in this divorce, that is literally what you have to think of. Okay, does this benefit my kids, my mental health, my wellness, just keeping it from them? Well, I don't want them to have it. It's just it's not going to benefit you in the future. But Emily, what's your brilliant advice for the housing area?
Well, as always, I'm going to keep it consistent. My number one thing is go get your credit pulled, because that is the number one thing that will tell you just so many pieces of information. I don't even care about the score as much as I care about what we see. And you can do it for free. And I talk about it all the time. And the other is knowledge is power. So if you start getting comfortable with talking about numbers, rehearsing numbers, getting your specific situation kind of on paper and start working that out, you start becoming more confident. You start becoming more confident in what you want and how you're going to actually get what you want, how you're going to execute. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think the ending takeaway is, obviously we want you to go to the divorceallies.com and take a look at all the things that we provide. But if you are watching this and if you made it all the way to the end, you can actually email, I believe, hello@thedivorceallies.com. I'm going to put it in there. It's coming under Emily. And Anna will confirm that. But if you email hello@thedivorceallies and you tell them that you watched this workshop, we're actually going to send you a link to watch one of the pre-recorded, like maybe a couple weeks ago, of the circle. And so that you can really get into what we're doing in the circle, some of the topics that we're talking about. If there is a time in the future that you would like to join the circle as a complimentary invite, you can reach out to any of the allies and we will give you a link for that week, and you can join us for 1 week and get an idea of what to expect. So again, we encourage you to really reach out to us directly and ask the questions that you have. This is a new type of situation, process, community that we are building, and we're trying to offer up really smart women to other really smart women, and we can help you through this process. So again, if there are things that we can help you with or provide, we will, and we can give you some voyeur into the circle. But for the most part, once you get in the circle, you'll probably never want to leave, because we help you not only with this part of the process, but even on into the future. So thank you for joining us. And if you have any additional questions, I think this is also going to be live streamed and posted in YouTube. And so you can also go back to that and ask any questions that you may have. And we will also post them out as other content for you to get all of the answers. Again, we have no problem answering all of your questions in any modality. We just know that if you come together once a week, you can get them all answered in one place. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in the circle.